The bond between fated mates is supposed to be the one absolute truth in a world of chaos. It is the sacred law that governs the wolf within. But for Sienna Mercer, the night that was supposed to secure her future became a public execution of her heart. Standing before the elite of werewolf society, she waited for the embrace of her soulmate, only to receive a rejection so cold it shattered the room. But destiny has a twisted sense of humor. When a prince throws away a diamond, he shouldn't be surprised when the king steps in to pick it up. This is the story of how a rejection started a war, and how the Alpha King found his queen in his son's discard pile. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Valerius estate didn't just sparkle, they judged. Or at least that was how Sienna Mercer felt as she smoothed the fabric of her emerald silk gown for the 100th time. The dress was a thrift store, find painstakingly altered by her own hands to mimic the high-fashion labels worn by the other women in the room, but under the harsh crystal lights, she felt like an imposter. This was the Ascension Ball. Tonight, Prince Liam Valerius, the heir to the entire lycanthrope monarchy, turned 22. Tonight he would formally take his place as the acting alpha of the royal pack. And tonight, according to the whispers of the moon goddess in Sienna's dreams, she would finally meet her mate. "Stop fidgeting," a sharp voice hissed. Sienna turned to see Beatrice, her stepmother, holding a glass of expensive champagne like a weapon. Beatrice was a woman who valued status above oxygen. "You look desperate. A Valerius doesn't look at desperate things." "I'm not desperate," Sienna whispered, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I just feel strange. The air feels heavy." It wasn't just heavy. It was electric. The moment Sienna had stepped onto the estate grounds, a scent had hit her, a mix of cedarwood rain and something darker, like burnt ozone. It was intoxicating. It pulled at her navel, a magnetic hook dragging her toward the center of the room. The heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. The room, filled with over 300 of the country's most powerful alphas and lunas, fell into a reverent silence. "Presenting," the announcer's voice boomed, "His Royal Highness Prince Liam Valerius." Liam stepped onto the balcony. He was undeniably striking tall with the lean, predatory build of a runner and hair the color of spun gold. He looked every bit the fairy tale prince. Sienna's breath hitched. The scent. It was coming from him. The connection snapped into place with the violence of a whip crack. Her wolf, usually a dormant, quiet presence in her mind, suddenly howled, clawing at her consciousness. "Mate. He is ours." Liam descended the stairs, his blue eyes scanning the crowd with an air of bored arrogance. He reached the bottom floor, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. Sienna couldn't move. She was frozen, locked in the gravitational pull of the bond. As he moved closer, his nose flared. He stopped. The room held its breath. Liam turned slowly, his gaze locking onto Sienna. For a second time, suspended. Sienna felt tears prick her eyes. The legends were true. The overwhelming rush of love, the sense of coming home, it was all real. She took a trembling step forward, her hand reaching out instinctively. "Liam!" She breathed the name, tasting like honey. Liam stared at her, but there was no adoration in his eyes. There was no warmth. There was only a curling lip of disgust. He laughed, a dry, cruel sound that echoed off the marble floors. "You?" Liam asked, his voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "The goddess paired me with the Mercer charity case." Sienna's hand dropped. The warmth in her chest turned to ice. "Liam!" Liam turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide, inviting them in on the joke. "Look at her. She smells like library dust and cheap detergent. Is this what the kingdom deserves as a queen?" Scattered nervous laughter rippled through the sycophants in the room. "Liam, please," Sienna whispered, her face burning. The bond is a biological suggestion, not a law," Liam sneered. He reached into the crowd and grabbed the hand of a woman standing in the front row. It was Tiffany Street Clare, the daughter of a wealthy tech mogul draped in Versace and dripping in diamonds. Tiffany smirked, looping her arm through Liam's. "I need a partner who understands power, Sienna, not one who fixes hems." Liam looked back at Sienna, his eyes going pitch black as his wolf surfaced. The pressure in the room spiked. He was using his alpha command. "Future Alpha King," he boomed, the voice vibrating the champagne glasses. "Reject you, Sienna Mercer, as my mate." The pain was physical. It felt like a serrated knife, being dragged down the center of her soul. Sienna gasped, clutching her chest, her knees buckling. The bond shattered the snapping recoil, leaving her gasping for air. "Accept it," Liam commanded. Sienna choked on a sob. Tears blurred her vision. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing her into the floor. 300 people watched, and not one moved to help her. Beatrice was looking away, pretending she didn't know the girl on the floor. "I said accept it," Liam roared, enjoying the show of dominance. "I accept," Sienna whispered the words, tearing her throat raw. "Good." Liam turned his back on her, pulling Tiffany close. "Music. The night is young." The orchestra hesitated, then hurriedly began to play a waltz. The crowd turned their backs, the wall of bodies closing off the sight of the girl, kneeling on the marble. Sienna scrambled to her feet, blinded by tears. She had to get out. She couldn't breathe. She pushed through the heavy doors, stumbling out into the cool night air. She didn't stop at the valet. She ran. She ran until the heels of her shoes broke, and then she ran barefoot across the gravel, heading for the heavy iron gates of the estate. She was halfway down the long, winding driveway, flanked by ancient oaks, when the blinding headlights of a convoy swept over her. She froze, shielding her eyes. A sleek, armored black SUV screeched to a halt just feet from her. 2 more vehicles boxed her in. The rear door of the lead SUV opened. The presence that stepped out was not like Liam's. Liam's aura was a thunderstorm, flashy, loud, chaotic. This presence was the ocean, deep, crushing, and terrifyingly vast. A man stepped into the beam of the headlights. He was taller than Liam, his shoulders broader. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Sienna's entire life. His hair was dark, peppered with distinguished grey at the temples, and his face was a hard mask of brutal carved lines. It was Magnus Valerius, the Alpha King, the man who had been ruling the Global Council overseas for the last 5 years. He wasn't supposed to be here. Sienna stood shivering in her torn dress, the rain beginning to fall. She bowed her head, exposing her neck, an instinctual sign of submission to the apex predator. "Look at me," a voice commanded. It was deep, a baritone that vibrated in her bones. Sienna slowly lifted her chin. King Magnus stepped closer, ignoring the rain soaking his expensive suit. He looked at her tear-streaked face, then at her bare, bleeding feet. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring. A flicker of something dangerous passed behind his steel-grey eyes. "Why?" Magnus asked, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Does the scent of my son's rejection cling to you, while the scent of my mate pours off your skin?" Sienna blinked the rain dripping from her lashes. Your mate? Magnus took one final step, closing the distance. He reached out his large, rough thumb, brushing the tear from her cheek. The spark that jumped between them wasn't a flicker. It was an inferno. It dwarfed what she had felt for Liam. "Get in the car, Sienna," the king said. "We have a party to crash." The interior of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was silent as a tomb save for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the bulletproof glass. Sienna sat pressed against the leather door, shivering violently. It wasn't just the cold, it was the proximity to him. Magnus Valerius took up space, not just physically, though his broad frame dominated the back seat, but energetically. His power rolled off him in waves tasting of dark chocolate and ozone. He hadn't looked at her since she entered the car. He was busy typing on a tablet, his jaw set in a hard line. "Drink," he said, not looking up. Sienna jumped. He held out a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. I don't drink alcohol." "Your Majesty," she stammered. "It's brandy. It will stop the shock from stopping your heart. Drink." It wasn't a suggestion. Sienna took the glass with trembling fingers and downed a mouthful. It burned all the way down, but the warmth bloomed in her stomach, chasing away the numbness of the rejection. "Thank you," she whispered. Magnus finally set the tablet down. He turned to face her. In the dim light of the passing street lamps, he looked lethal. "Tell me exactly what he said." Sienna looked down at her hands. He said I smelled like library dust." A muscle in Magnus's jaw ticked. "And he said the bond was a suggestion. He chose Tiffany St. Clair." Magnus let out a low, dark chuckle that lacked any humor. Tiffany St. Clair, a woman whose family made their fortune selling data, and whose loyalty can be bought with a handbag. My son is a fool. "He is the prince," Sienna said softly, ingrained respect warring with her heartbreak. "He is a boy, playing with matches," Magnus corrected. "And he just burned down his own house." The car slowed. Sienna looked out the window and panicked. They weren't leaving the estate. They were back at the main entrance. "Your Majesty, please," she begged, shrinking back. "I can't go back in there. Everyone saw. They're laughing at me. I have nothing. I am nobody." Magnus moved so fast she didn't see it happen. One hand gripped the back of her seat, the other resting on the leather beside her leg, boxing her in. His face was inches from hers. His eyes, usually cold steel, were swirling with flecks of gold. "You are not nobody," he growled low in his throat. "You are the one the moon goddess designed for the Valerius bloodline. Liam was the first draft. He was found wanting. Nature corrected its mistake." "I don't understand." Sienna breathed, mesmerized by his intensity. "You will." The door was pulled open by a security guard. Magnus stepped out, buttons his jacket, and turned, extending a hand to her. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "I don't know you," she answered honestly. "Smart girl." Magnus smirked. "But tonight I am the only shield you have. Take my hand." Sienna took it. His grip was warm, callous, and unbreakable. The return to the ballroom was nothing like her first entrance. When the doors opened this time, the silence wasn't reverent. It was terrified. The king had returned. Liam was in the center of the dance floor, dipping Tiffany a glass of champagne raised high. He froze when he saw the figure in the doorway. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "Father," Liam stammered, straightening up. Tiffany scrambled to fix her dress, looking between the two men. We didn't expect you back from the Swiss summit until next month." Magnus didn't speak. He walked into the room, Sienna's hand tucked firmly in the crook of his arm. The crowd parted so violently, people tripped over themselves to get out of the way. Magnus stopped 10 feet from his son. The resemblance was there, the jaw the height, but where Liam was soft gold, Magnus was hard iron. "I heard there was a rejection tonight," Magnus said, his voice projecting without effort. Liam stood taller, trying to regain his composure. "Yes, I made a strategic choice, for the good of the pack. Sienna she is weak. She brings nothing to the table. Tiffany has connections, resources." "You traded a fated mate for a bank account," Magnus said flatly. "I traded a burden for an asset," Liam argued, his voice rising. "I am the future king. I choose my own destiny." "You are a child," Magnus roared, the sound causing the crystal glasses on the nearby tables to shatter. "You do not choose destiny. You serve it." Liam flinched. Magnus turned his gaze to the crowd. "My son believes that the bond is a suggestion. He believes that he is too powerful for the laws of our kind." Magnus turned back to Sienna. He looked at her, and for the first time his expression softened. It was a possessive, intense look that made her knees weak. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes," Magnus declared. "If the son is too blind to see the treasure before him, then the father must step in to preserve the bloodline." Gasps erupted throughout the room. Liam's eyes bulged. "Father, what are you doing?" Magnus lifted Sienna's hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles while maintaining eye contact with his son. "I'm Magnus Valerius Alpha King," he announced, his voice dark and final. "Claim Sienna Mercer, not as a ward, not as a guest." He paused, letting the tension snap. "I claim her as my mate, and your queen." The room erupted into chaos. Liam staggered back as if he'd been punched. Tiffany shrieked. Sienna looked up at Magnus, her eyes wide. "You can't just—" "I can," Magnus whispered in her ear, pulling her flush against his hard body. "I just did. Welcome to the throne, my dear. Try not to tremble. It excites me." The drive from the Valerius estate to the royal palace was a blur of passing streetlights and suffocating silence. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, hammering against the roof of the Rolls-Royce like 1,000 angry fists. Sienna sat on the edge of the plush leather seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles turned white. She dared not look at the man beside her. Magnus Valerius had returned to his tablet, the blue light illuminating the sharp, brutal angles of his face. He seemed unbothered by the fact that he had just upended the entire political structure of the werewolf kingdom in under 5 minutes. "Stop thinking so loudly," Magnus said, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. "It's giving me a headache." Sienna flinched. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I don't understand the rules." Magnus swiped a finger across the screen, closing his file. He turned to her, and the sheer weight of his attention made the air in the car feel thin. "What rules?" "The rules of this." She gestured vaguely between them. "Liam rejected me." The bond snapped. I felt it break. How can we? "The bond you felt with Liam was an adolescent tether." Magnus explained, his tone clinical, as if he were discussing tax reform rather than matters of the heart. "It is a biological urge designed to encourage procreation among young wolves. It is fragile. It breaks easily, as you witnessed." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, invading her personal space. "But the bond of an Alpha King is different. It is not a tether, Sienna. It is a chain. When I claimed you, my wolf recognized you not as a plaything, but as a necessity. The moon goddess gave you to the Valerius line. My son was too stupid to accept the gift. I am not." "But I don't love you," Sienna blurted out, then immediately covered her mouth, her eyes widening in horror. Magnus didn't get angry. Instead, the corner of his lip quirked upward in a ghost of a smile. Love is a human construct. Wolves deal in loyalty, protection, and possession. You are safe with me. You will never be hungry, cold, or humiliated again. In exchange, you will stand by my side, bear my mark, and ensure my legacy. That is the deal. And if I say no, Sienna whispered. Magnus looked out the window as the car turned onto a massive suspension bridge leading to the private island where the royal palace stood. You have nowhere to go. Beatrice, that stepmother of yours, has already texted my assistant asking how much your dowry will be. She sold your room before we even left the driveway. Sienna felt the blood drain from her face. She was homeless, truly homeless. I see, she said, her voice hollow. Do not look so tragic, Magnus said, reaching into the pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a black velvet box and tossed it into her lap. Put it on. Sienna opened the box. Inside sat a ring that cost more than the entire neighborhood she grew up in. It was a massive uncut sapphire surrounded by black diamonds. The crest of the royal house was etched into the band. This is the Queen's signet, Magnus said. It allows you access to the palace, the treasury, and the security grid. Without it, the guards at the gate would shoot you on sight. Wear it. Sienna slid the heavy ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. A strange warmth rushed up her arm, settling in her chest. It wasn't the frantic hot spark she had felt with Liam. It was a steady, grounding hum, like the purr of a sleeping tiger. The car slowed as they passed through 3 layers of security checkpoints. The royal palace loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress of grey stone and glass perched on the cliffs overlooking the churning ocean. It looked less like a home and more like a stronghold. The car stopped in the circular driveway. A phalanx of servants was already waiting, standing in the rain with umbrellas. As Magnus stepped out, the staff bowed low. He ignored them, coming around to open Sienna's door himself. He offered his hand again. "Welcome home, Sienna," he said. She took his hand. As she stepped out, she saw a woman standing at the top of the stairs. She was tall, with severe black hair, pulled into a tight bun, and a uniform that looked military-grade. "This is Mrs. Hastings," Magnus said as they ascended the stairs. "She runs the household. She will show you to your quarters." Mrs. Hastings bowed stiffly. Her eyes were sharp and scanning Sienna from her muddy feet to her ruined dress. "Your Majesty, we have prepared the east wing." "No," Magnus said, his voice stopping Mrs. Hastings in her tracks. "She stays in the King's suite." Mrs. Hastings' eyes widened slightly, the only sign of shock she allowed. "The master suite, sir. But that room has not been shared since my late wife died 15 years ago." Magnus finished, his voice dropping a chilling octave. "I am aware of the history, Hastings. Move her things." "Yes, Alpha." Magnus turned to Sienna. "I have business in the war room. The council is in a panic because of my announcement. I will see you at breakfast." He didn't kiss her. He didn't offer a comforting word. He simply turned on his heel and strode down the hallway, a trail of advisors scrambling to keep up with him. Sienna was left standing in the massive echoing foyer, shivering in her wet dress. "Follow me, Miss Mercer," Mrs. Hastings said, her tone polite but icy. They walked through endless corridors, lined with portraits of dead kings. Finally, they reached a set of double mahogany doors. Mrs. Hastings pushed them open. The King's suite was larger than Sienna's entire house. One wall was entirely glass, looking out over the stormy ocean. There was a fireplace large enough to roast a specialized ox, A bed the size of a small island and a scent. It smelled like him. Cedar rain and power. "The bath is drawn," Mrs. Hastings said, pointing to a door on the left. "Clothes have been provided. The king expects you at breakfast at 8 a.m. sharp. He does not tolerate tardiness." "Thank you," Sienna whispered. Mrs. Hastings paused at the door. She looked back at Sienna, her expression softening just a fraction. "A word of advice, child. Liam is a boy who plays at being a wolf. Magnus is the wolf who ate the world. Do not try to tame him. Just survive him." With a click, the door closed. Sienna walked to the window, looking at the storm raging outside. She touched the cold glass, the sapphire ring on her finger catching the lightning. "Survive him," she repeated to the empty room. For the first time that night, her wolf spoke in her mind. It wasn't a whimper of rejection this time. It was a low, satisfied growl. "He is strong," her wolf purred. "He is worthy." Sienna closed her eyes. She wasn't so sure. Sienna woke up before her alarm. It was hard to sleep when you were wrapped in sheets that smelled like the terrifying man who had claimed you. She sat up the memory of the previous night, hitting her like a physical blow. The rejection, the humiliation, the claim. She slid out of the massive bed. On the vanity, a new outfit was waiting. It wasn't the thrift store glam she was used to. It was a power suit, a tailored white blazer, and trousers made of silk crepe paired with nude heels that looked like weapons. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking. She pulled her hair back into a sleek ponytail, trying to look the part of a queen, even if she felt like a fraud. She checked the clock. 7:55 a.m. She rushed out of the suite, navigating the maze of hallways. Her memory served her well, and she found the main staircase just as the grandfather clock began to chime 8. She reached the double doors of the royal dining hall. 2 guards, massive men with assault rifles, nodded to her and pushed the doors open. The conversation inside stopped instantly. It was a long, rectangular table. Magnus sat at the head, reading a newspaper, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He was wearing a casual grey sweater and dark jeans, looking deceptively domestic. To his right sat Liam, and next to Liam, draped over him like a cheap scarf, was Tiffany St. Clair. Sienna froze. She hadn't expected them to be here. "Ah," Magnus said, not looking up from his paper. "Right on time." "Sit." He gestured to the chair directly to his left, the seat of honor, directly across from Liam. Sienna forced her legs to move. The click of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. She felt Liam's eyes on her. She could feel the heat of his gaze burning into her skin. She pulled out the chair and sat. A servant immediately placed a plate of fruit and smoked salmon in front of her. "Coffee?" Magnus asked, finally folding his paper. "Tea, please," Sienna said, her voice surprisingly steady. "So." Tiffany broke the silence, her voice shrill and grating. She was wearing a pink tracksuit that looked out of place in the grand room. "I didn't know the palace ran a charity shelter." Liam snorted into his coffee. Magnus slowly turned his head. He didn't look at Tiffany. He looked at Liam. "Control your pet, Liam, or I will put her outside." Liam stiffened. "Tiffany is my guest, father, and she has a point." "What is she doing here, in the Queen's seat?" "She is here because she is the Queen," Magnus said, calmly, buttering a piece of toast. "Or she will be, once the mating ceremony is finalized next week." Clang. Liam dropped his fork. It hit the china plate with a deafening noise. "Next week, you're rushing the ceremony." "That's insanity. The council will never approve a commoner. The council approves what I tell them to approve," Magnus interrupted, And she is not a commoner. She is my mate. She's my reject, Liam shouted, standing up. His face was flushed red. I threw her away yesterday, and you picked her up like leftovers. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Magnus placed his toast down. He didn't stand up. He didn't shout. He simply looked at his son with eyes that were black pits of dominance. Sit down, Magnus said softly. Liam's knees buckled. The Alpha command forced him back into his chair. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white sweat beading on his forehead. You rejected her, Magnus said, his voice quiet and dangerous. You broke the bond. You severed the tie. She is nothing to you now. If you speak of her with disrespect again, I will remove your tongue. Do I make myself clear? Liam nodded jerkily, unable to speak against the command. Magnus released the pressure. Liam gasped for air, clutching his chest. Tiffany looked terrified, shrinking back into her chair. Sienna watched the exchange wide-eyed. She had never seen power like this. Liam was an alpha strong in his own right, but against Magnus, he was a toddler. Magnus turned to Sienna, his expression instantly shifting from murderous to attentive. He reached over and adjusted the collar of her blazer. His fingers brushed her neck, sending a jolt of electricity down her spine. Eat, Sienna, he said gently. You'll need your strength. You have a busy day. I do, she asked. Yes, you need to select the menu for the engagement gala, and then you have training. Training, self-defense, Magnus said, taking a sip of his coffee. And etiquette, and political strategy. Being my queen puts a target on your back. I intend to make you bulletproof. Across the table, Liam was staring at Sienna, but it wasn't with the disgust he had shown the night before. As Magnus touched Sienna, Liam's nostrils flared. His eyes tracked the movement of his father's hand on her skin. A low, confused growl rumbled in Liam's chest. Now that the biological tether was broken, Liam was seeing Sienna for the first time without the pressure of fate. He saw the way the sunlight hit her hair. He saw the steel in her spine. He saw the power radiating off her from the king's mark. And for the first time the prince realized that the dusty librarian he had thrown away was actually a stunning woman. Father, Liam said, his voice strained. About the gala. Tiffany and I were hoping to announce our engagement there as well. A double celebration. Magnus paused. He looked at Tiffany, who smiled weakly. Then he looked at Sienna. What do you think, my dear? Magnus asked Sienna. It is your party. Shall we let the children share your spotlight? Sienna looked at Liam. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the need to prove he hadn't made a mistake. She saw Tiffany's smug arrogance, assuming Sienna would roll over. Sienna took a sip of her tea. She set the cup down slowly. No, Sienna said clearly. Liam's jaw dropped. Excuse me. I said no, Sienna repeated, meeting Liam's gaze head-on. The gala is to celebrate the union of the king and his queen. Having a mistress announced on the same stage would be tacky. Don't you think? Magnus threw his head back and laughed, a deep, booming sound of genuine amusement. Tacky, Magnus agreed, grinning at his son. You heard the Queen, Liam. Pick another date. Liam glared at Sienna, a mix of fury and sudden intense fascination burning in his eyes. She had never said no to him in her life. She had always been the shy girl in the background. But the woman sitting next to the Alpha King was not shy. May I be excused? Liam gritted out. Go. Magnus waved a hand. Liam stormed out. Tiffany clacking along behind him, looking furious. When the doors slammed shut, silence returned to the room. Sienna let out a breath she had been holding, her shoulders slumping. Was that too much? Magnus turned to her. His eyes were glowing with pride. He reached under the table and placed his hand on her knee, squeezing firmly. "No," Magnus murmured. "It was perfect. You are a natural." He leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear. "But be careful, little wolf. Liam is spoiled. When you take away a child's toy, they only want it more. He will come for you." Sienna shivered. "Let him come." Magnus smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who had just found a partner for the hunt. "That's my girl." The week leading up to the engagement gala was a crucible. Sienna was forged in fire, her days split between the war room and the training dojo. Magnus was not a man who believed in coddling. If she was to be his queen, she had to be able to stand on her own 2 feet. In the royal dojo, a cavernous room with padded floors and walls lined with ancient weaponry, Sienna wiped sweat from her brow. She was panting, her muscles burning. "Again," the instructor barked. He was a scarred wolf named Kael, the head of the royal guard. Sienna gritted her teeth. She lunged, executing the takedown maneuver she had been practicing for 3 hours. She swept Kael's leg, using his own momentum against him. He hit the mat with a satisfying thud. "Good," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows. Sienna straightened her chest, heaving. Magnus was leaning against a pillar, arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing a black tactical shirt that clung to his frame, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "She learns fast," Kael noted, getting to his feet and bowing to his king. "She has to," Magnus said. He walked onto the mat. "Leave us." Kael bowed again and vanished, the heavy doors clicking shut. Magnus circled Sienna. He moved like a jungle cat, silent, heavy, dangerous. "You are favoring your left side. If an assassin comes at you from the right, you are dead." "I'm tired, Magnus," Sienna admitted, dropping the formality. They had spent every night talking until dawn, strategizing, learning each other. The intimacy between them was growing a slow burn fire that was far more terrifying than the instant spark she'd had with Liam. "Tired is dead," Magnus said simply. He stopped in front of her. "Liam rejected you because he thought you were weak. The world will try to kill you because they think you are lucky. You must be neither." He reached out, tucking a stray lock of damp hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, contradicting his harsh words. "But you are doing well. My wolf is pleased." Sienna felt a blush rise up her neck. "Just your wolf." Magnus stepped closer, his chest brushing hers. He smelled of dark spices and raw aggression. "I am a greedy man, Sienna. I want you safe so I can keep you. That is not noble. That is selfish." Before the moment could deepen, the doors banged open. "Farther the northern pack borders are—" Liam froze in the doorway. He took in the scene, the empty gym, the sweat on Sienna's skin, the way his father was looming over her, practically wrapping her in his scent. A flash of naked, ugly jealousy twisted Liam's face. "Am I interrupting?" Liam asked, his voice tight. Magnus didn't step back. He turned his head slowly. "Knocking is a skill usually mastered in toddlerhood, Liam." "I need to speak to Sienna," Liam said, ignoring his father. "Alone." Magnus raised an eyebrow. "She is your future mother-in-law. Show some respect." "She is my age," Liam snapped, "and I need to clear the air before the gala, unless you don't trust her." Magnus looked down at Sienna. "Do you wish to speak to him?" Sienna looked at Liam. He looked disheveled, darker circles under his eyes than usual. The arrogance was cracking. "It's fine," Sienna said. "I can handle him." Magnus stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I will be in my office. If he steps out of line, just scream." I'll tear the throat out of him before he hits the floor. Magnus walked past Liam, checking his shoulder into his son's, hard enough to make Liam stumble. When the door closed, the silence was heavy. Liam walked onto the mat. He stopped 3 feet from her. He inhaled deeply, and his expression crumbled. You smell like him. It's disgusting. It covers your natural scent. It's the scent of my mate, Sienna said coolly, crossing her arms. What do you want, Liam? I made a mistake, Liam blurted out. Sienna blinked. Excuse me, Tiffany. Liam paced, running a hand through his hair. She's vapid. She talks about shoes and social media followers. There's no depth, no connection. The bond. I don't feel it with her. You broke our bond, Sienna reminded him. You chose her. I was pressured, Liam argued, stepping closer. My father is the king. I felt I had to be perfect to choose a perfect mate to match his expectations. I panicked. But seeing you this week, seeing you take charge, seeing you with him, he stopped inches from her. His blue eyes were pleading. It should be us, Sienna. You know it. That pull you felt at the ball. It's still there, for me. I know it's there for you. He reached out to grab her hand. Sienna didn't move away, but as soon as Liam's skin touched hers, a shockwave of gold light blasted from the ring on her finger. Liam yelled, jerking his hand back. Smoke rose from his fingertips. What the hell? He hissed, cradling his burned hand. The king's mark, Sienna said softly, looking at the ring. It protects what belongs to him. She looked up at Liam, her eyes hard. The girl who had cried in the rain was gone. The pull isn't there for me, Liam, she said honestly. When you rejected me, you killed it. I don't look at you and see my future anymore. I look at you and see a boy who was afraid of a thrift store dress. He will destroy you. Liam spat his hurt, turning to anger. He is a monster. He is cold, cruel, and he breaks everything he touches. Why do you think my mother died? Her heart gave out, trying to love a stone. Get out, Sienna commanded. She didn't shout, but her voice carried the weight of the Luna. Liam stared at her, breathing hard. Enjoy the gala, Sienna, but remember monsters don't have happy endings. He stormed out. Sienna stood alone in the gym. Her hand was trembling not from fear, but from adrenaline. She looked at the ring. It had burned Liam. Magnus hadn't just given her jewelry. He had weaponized her. And for the first time, she realized that maybe, just maybe, the monster was exactly what she needed. The royal ballroom was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume, champagne, and the underlying musk of shifters posturing for dominance. Everyone who was anyone was here. The Pack Alphas from the 7 territories, the council members, and the media. They were all waiting for one thing, the king and his new queen. At the top of the grand staircase, the herald struck his staff against the floor, presenting His Majesty King Magnus Valerius and his mate Sienna Mercer. Sienna stepped into the light. She heard the collective gasp of the room. She wasn't wearing white. She wasn't wearing a soft pastel to appear innocent. She was wearing a gown of blood-red velvet, off the shoulder with a slit that went up to her thigh. The bodice was armored with black crystals that looked like dragon scales. Her hair was loose, a cascade of dark waves, and on her head sat a tiara of black iron and rubies. She looked like a war goddess. Magnus stood beside her, looking devastating in a black tuxedo with a red silk lining. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Breathe, he whispered. They are sheep. You are the wolf. They descended the stairs. The crowd parted. Sienna kept her chin high, meeting the gaze of the people who had laughed at her a week ago. They weren't laughing now. They were bowing. Near the orchestra, Liam stood with a bandaged hand holding a drink. Tiffany was beside him, in a gold dress that looked garish next to Sienna's dark elegance. Tiffany was glaring so hard, it was a miracle her wine glass didn't shatter. "Shall we dance?" Magnus asked. He swept Sienna onto the floor. The music swelled a haunting, powerful waltz. Magnus moved with surprising grace for a man of his size. "You are shaking," he noted. "Liam said something to me," Sienna whispered, looking up at him. "He said your heart is a stone, that you destroyed your first wife." Magnus's expression tightened. For a second, the mask slipped, revealing a deep, ancient pain. "Is that what you believe?" "I don't know," Sienna said, "but you haven't destroyed me yet." Magnus pulled her closer, his nose brushing her temple. "My first wife. She was a gentle soul. The crown was too heavy for her. The politics, the threats, it ate her ally. I tried to shield her, but I failed. I swore I would never take another mate unless she was made of iron." He pulled back to look her in the eye. "You, Sienna, are titanium. You will not break." Sienna felt a lump in her throat. It was the closest thing to a declaration of love she expected to get from him. Suddenly the music screeched to a halt. A feedback whine from a microphone cut through the room. Sienna turned. Tiffany St. Clair was standing on the stage, having snatched the microphone from the lead singer. She looked unhinged, her eyes wide and glassy. She had clearly had too much to drink. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tiffany slurred, "we are all bowing to the Queen. Aren't we so beautiful, so lucky?" "Get her off the stage," Magnus commanded to his guards, his voice low and lethal. "Wait!" Tiffany screamed, holding up a manila folder. "You all think she's a fated mate, a miracle. It's a lie. I have the proof." The room went deadly silent. Tiffany waved the folder. "My father ran a background check. Sienna Mercer isn't just a poor orphan. Her mother was a witch, a rogue practitioner of dark magic." Gasps rippled through the crowd. In werewolf society, dark magic was a capital offense. It was considered cheating nature. "She used a spell," Tiffany shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at Sienna. "That's why the king is obsessed with her. She bewitched him. She put a hex on the Alpha line." Liam stepped forward, looking horrified. "Tiffany, stop." "No, you felt it too, Liam," Tiffany yelled. "You said the bond felt weird. That's because it's fake. She's a witch and she needs to burn." Magnus released Sienna. He didn't look worried. He looked bored. He walked toward the stage. The crowd scrambled back, terrified of his aura. "A witch?" Magnus asked, his voice calm but booming. "The files are right here." Tiffany threw the folder at him. Papers scattered across the floor. "Her mother was exiled for potion brewing. It's in the blood." Magnus didn't even look at the papers. He stopped at the base of the stage and looked up at Tiffany. "Interesting theory," Magnus said. "But there is a flaw in your logic." "What flaw?" Tiffany sneered. "A witch's spell cannot affect an Alpha King," Magnus said. "Our blood is immune to coercion. If she had tried to spell me, I would have killed her instantly." He turned to the crowd. "However, you have insulted my mate. You have ruined my evening, and you have questioned my judgment." Magnus extended his hand toward Tiffany. He didn't touch her. He just closed his fist. Tiffany choked. She grabbed her throat, her feet lifting off the ground, as if an invisible hand were strangling her. "Father, don't!" Liam shouted, rushing forward. "Stay back!" Magnus roared, his eyes glowing a brilliant, terrifying gold. "She is a traitor!" Magnus growled. "But I will not kill her tonight. I do not want her blood on my floor." He flicked his wrist, and Tiffany was thrown through the air. She crashed into a table of hors d'oeuvres, collapsing in a heap of broken glass and pastry. "Get her out of my sight," Magnus ordered the guards, "and seize her father's assets. If he used his resources to spy on the crown, he is an enemy of the state." Security swarmed Tiffany, dragging her screaming from the room. Magnus turned back to Sienna. He walked over to her, stepping over the scattered papers. He took her face in his hands. "Are you all right?" he asked. Sienna looked at the papers on the floor. One of them had a photo of her mother. A mother she barely remembered. "Is it true?" Sienna whispered. "Was she a witch?" Magnus picked up the paper. He glanced at it, then looked at Sienna. "She was a healer," Magnus said quietly. "The council called it witchcraft because they feared what they couldn't control, just like they fear you." He took her hand and raised it high. "Let them talk," Magnus announced to the room. "Let them whisper, but know this. The next person who disrespects my queen will not leave this room alive. Continue the music." The band nervously started playing again. Sienna leaned into Magnus, her heart racing. He had defended her. He had almost killed for her. But as she looked over Magnus's shoulder, she saw Liam. He was on his knees near the table where Tiffany had crashed, holding a piece of the broken glass. He was staring at Sienna with a look that chilled her to the bone. It wasn't love. It wasn't regret. It was madness. And then the lights went out. Total darkness engulfed the ballroom. "Secure the king!" a guard shouted. Glass shattered. A red laser dot appeared on Magnus's chest. "Magnus or—" Sienna screamed, shoving him with all her strength. Thwip! A sound like a silenced gunshot. Sienna felt a hot, searing pain in her shoulder. The force threw her backward. "Sienna!" Magnus's roar shook the foundations of the palace. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. Sienna lay on the floor, clutching her shoulder, blood bright red. Human blood was seeping through her fingers, staining the red dress a darker shade. Magnus was over her in an instant, his face a mask of pure feral panic. "Medic!" he screamed, his voice breaking. Sienna's vision blurred. The last thing she saw was Liam standing in the shadows, smiling. And behind him, a group of men in tactical gear were rappelling down from the skylights. The war hadn't just started. It was inside the house. The ballroom dissolved into a kaleidoscope of violence. Red emergency lights bathed the panic in blood as intruders descended from the ceiling. Sienna, clutching her bleeding shoulder on the marble floor, watched as Magnus Valerius shed his humanity. With a sound like cracking thunder, the Alpha King ripped through his tuxedo. Bones snapped and reshaped until the man vanished, replaced by the Midnight Wolf. A creature of nightmare black fur, bristling and gold eyes burning. He didn't fight the mercenaries. He slaughtered them, tearing through their tactical gear with terrifying speed. "Sienna!" a voice hissed. Sienna turned. Liam crouched behind an overturned table, a pistol in his hand. But he wasn't aiming at the assassins. He was aiming at the wolf's exposed flank. "He has to die," Liam muttered, his eyes wild. "The council promised me the crown if he falls." From the shadows of the service entrance, the traitorous Northern Alliance Alphas stepped out, flanked by Beatrice. "You didn't think I'd let you marry up without my cut, did you?" Beatrice sneered, clutching a bag of cash. "I sold the security codes to secure my future." Sienna felt a cold horror, but there was no time to process the betrayal. Liam's finger tightened on the trigger. "Father," Liam yelled over the chaos. "Look at me." Magnus turned, jaws dripping red. Liam steadied his aim at the kill spot, behind the wolf's ear. Sienna didn't think. She felt the ancient power in her blood, the heritage Tiffany had called witchcraft, boil to the surface. She surged past the guards, ignoring the agony in her shoulder. "Stop!" Sienna screamed. It was a lunar command, amplified by the adrenaline and the king's mark on her finger. The air rippled with force. The command hit Liam like a physical blow, jerking his arm. The gun fired. The bullet grazed Magnus's flank, but the shot went wide. Magnus roared, ignoring the mercenaries, to charge his son. He shifted back to human form, mid-air, tackling Liam into the marble floor. His hand crushed Liam's throat, lifting him off the ground. "I gave you life," Magnus snarled, his voice a guttural wreck. "And tonight I regret it." The room froze. The mercenaries, seeing the king still standing, dropped their weapons. Magnus tightened his grip, his eyes burning with lethal intent. "Magnus, wait." Sienna stumbled forward, placing her bloodied hand on his forearm. "Don't do it." "He tried to kill you," Magnus growled, not looking away from his son. "He is defeated," Sienna said, her voice steel-hard. "Don't make him a martyr. Make him a memory." Magnus stared at her, the gold in his eyes slowly fading to steel grey. He looked down at the weeping, broken boy in his grip. With a scoff of disgust, he threw Liam aside like a rag doll. "Arrest him," Magnus ordered, "and arrest the Northern Alphas, and her." "I'm the Queen's mother," Beatrice shrieked, as guards seized her. "You are a traitor," Sienna said coldly. "And you are no mother of mine." As the conspirators were dragged away, Magnus turned to Sienna. Panic cracked his stoic mask. "You're hurt." "I'm okay." Sienna looked down. The king's signet ring was pulsing with a soft blue light, the wound on her shoulder knitting itself together. "It accepted me." "I thought I lost you," Magnus breathed. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a desperate, consuming intensity in front of the wreckage and the stunned court. When they broke apart, Magnus raised Sienna's hand high. "The coup is over," he announced, his voice booming. "My son has forfeited his birthright. There is no prince." He looked at the woman beside him, his eyes full of pride. "But there is a queen." One by one, the remaining Alphas dropped to their knees. Sienna Mercer, the girl in the ruined red dress, stood amidst the glass and blood. She squeezed Magnus's hand, and the king squeezed back. "Long live the queen," he whispered. "Long live the king," she replied. 3 months later, the balcony of the royal palace overlooked a calm ocean. The storm had long since passed. Sienna stood at the railing, the heavy crown resting on the table inside. Magnus stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He was warm, solid, and safe. "Thinking about him?" Magnus asked softly. "Sometimes," Sienna admitted. "Liam, he is alive," Magnus said, working on a fishing trawler in Alaska. "No money, no title. Just hard labor. He is no longer our problem." "And Tiffany?" "Bankrupt," Magnus said with dark satisfaction. "Last I heard, she was live-streaming for pennies. A fitting purgatory." Sienna laughed softly, leaning back into him. The bond that had snapped with Liam had been a fragile string. But this was an anchor. "We have a council meeting in 10 minutes, Magnus murmured, kissing her temple. "Ready to rule the world." Sienna smiled, the sapphire ring glinting in the sun. The rejected girl was gone. Always. And that is the story of how Sienna Mercer went from a rejected outcast to the most powerful woman in the werewolf kingdom. It's a reminder that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually clearing the path for your true destiny. Liam chased the sparkle of a fake diamond and lost the real treasure, proving that character will always outshine status. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and royal justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were Sienna? Would you have forgiven Liam, or did he get what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching.